The hip-hop world trembled, not because of a beat drop, but because of a single sentence, one that rolled off Drake's tongue and split a generation of rap fans down the middle. In the haze of clout wars, long-forgotten feuds, and shifting alliances, Drake's defense of Jim Jones felt like a spark in a forest of dry legends. "It's better than Nas," Drake reportedly said, and the ripple effect was instant. In one breath, he dismissed one of the greatest lyricists to ever touch a mic and lifted Jim Jones into a pantheon most thought forever sealed. Within hours, Instagram flared up. On @HollywoodUnlocked, Noor appeared in a clip, shaking his head slowly but standing firm behind his words. "I see where Jim is coming from." Another post by @AllDefMusic echoed the moment, playing the Breakfast Club clip on Lupin ORE, no stranger to controversy. It's not only validating Jim's position, but indirectly co-signing Drake's provocation. The reactions weren't quiet. They never are. YouTube was flooded within 24 hours. Titles screamed in bold red. Drake defends Jim Jones after Nas comment. Drake picks sides, fans furious. Some laughed, some raged, others leaned in closer. Jim Jones, in a now viral moment, claimed the entire conversation about him and Nas only went viral because of him. "I made Nas go viral, not the other way around." The arrogance, legendary. The confidence, unshaken. But something was missing. Nas, the man in the eye of the storm, remained silent. No tweet, no interview, no verse. And that silence only made the noise louder. As YouTubers broke down every syllable, fans were left asking, did Drake just declare war on an era? Or was this just ego masquerading as strategy? In the absence of an official statement, the streets started choosing sides. And like all great rap dramas, the stage was being set not by words alone, but by the weight they carried. The question now, was this the calm before a lyrical war? Or the quiet reveal of rap's next betrayal? Long before Drake's words sent shockwaves through the culture. The seeds of this unexpected rivalry had already been planted in the cracks of history buried beneath verses. Egos, and the silent politics of the game. It wasn't just a comment, it was a culmination. A timeline that began years ago when Jim Jones, often sidelined in lyrical rankings, began to speak louder about his worth. Interviews, podcast moments, cryptic captions, he had been quietly building a case. And then came the spark. Just a few days prior to Drake's remark, Jim Jones reignited the old tension by questioning Nas's current relevance, suggesting that the conversation around Nas only lights up when someone else breathes it into fire. That moment, clipped and posted by culture channels like All Def Music and Hollywood Unlocked, began circulating fast, but no one expected Drake to chime in. And when he did, it wasn't a whisper, it was a declaration. Fans were stunned, not just by the content of what Drake said, but by the timing. With Nas coming off a wave of recent projects, some of his most mature and technically praised work in years, the idea of Jim Jones being labeled better by one of hip-hop's most influential figures felt like an insult to legacy. YouTubers scrambled to make sense of it. Ellie Tecos, a rising commentary channel, dissected the statement moment by moment, overlaying it with past clips of Drake praising Nas, raising the question, did Drake change his view, or is something deeper at play? In another video, a host pointed out that Drake has long been strategic in who he elevates and who he distances himself from, especially when tensions are brewing in the industry. Was this about artistry or alliances? Right? And more importantly, why? Was Nas still so quiet? Every hour that passed without a response became its own kind of answer. This wasn't a diss track war. Not yet, but it was shaping into something more layered. The kind of feud where silence speaks louder than bars and every like or follow becomes a move on the chessboard. And still, the question kept building beneath the noise. Did Drake just pull the first move in a battle? Even he didn't realize he started. The emotional fallout didn't erupt all at once. It crept in slowly, like a cold front sliding over a summer skyline. Fans weren't just debating bars anymore. They were grieving something deeper: respect, legacy, the invisible code that held the culture together for decades. For many, Nas wasn't just a rapper. He was a symbol, a storyteller, a bridge to the roots of hip-hop before the glitter and the algorithms. So when Drake, the crowned prince of the streaming era, publicly defended Jim Jones and claimed he was better than Nas, it didn't just sound like opinion, it felt like erasure. The younger crowd, Drake loyalists, Dipset enthusiasts, those who'd grown up on playlist culture rather than vinyl, rallied behind the statement. Drake has the right to pick his side. They wrote across comment sections. Jim Jones been putting in work. But the older heads, the purists, the ones who memorized it was written bar for bar, weren't having it. They saw this as sacrilege. One YouTube video, now climbing past 100,000 views, features a fan crying into the camera, voice cracking. This ain't just about Nas. This is about history. This is about where we come from. The comment section read like a war memorial, long threads of people reliving their first time hearing NY State of Mind, contrasting it with the club anthems Jim Jones is known for. Even journalists began stepping in. A few indie bloggers wrote quiet pieces defending Nas's artistry, citing his Grammy wins, his recent 5-album run with Hit Boy, his cultural impact far beyond just radio play. But still no response from Nas. Not a single line, not a shadow of a clapback. And that silence began taking on a mythic quality. N-O-R-E. In yet another interview clip that made the rounds on Instagram, leaned forward and said something that struck a chord. I don't think Nas is ignoring this. Think he's waiting to see how loud it gets. Meanwhile, Jim Jones doubled down. In another viral clip, he laughed off the backlash and thanked Drake for being one of the few real ones left. That alone sent fans spiraling, asking, was there more to this alliance? Had Nas burned bridges quietly in the industry? Or was Drake simply lifting up someone the game had long ignored? No one had answers, just tension and questions, and more voices joining the storm. This wasn't about who was better anymore. It was about loyalty, memory, and whether hip-hop still had space for its own legends when new kings decided the old ones didn't matter. As the debate continued to swell across screens and sound bites, the silence from Nas began to feel heavier than any diss track could ever deliver. In an era where everyone talks, where artists clap back within hours and fans feed on chaos like it's oxygen, Nas's refusal to speak had turned into an act of defiance, or maybe mourning, or maybe strategy. No one knew. But everyone had a theory. Behind the scenes, music insiders began whispering to blogs and back channels that this wasn't just a casual comment. Gone viral, it was a signal of something deeper shifting beneath the surface of the industry. Drake wasn't just defending Jim Jones. He was repositioning the narrative, rewriting the totem pole. In a world where numbers often trump legacy, and cosigns can elevate a rapper more than skill ever could, it began to feel like this moment had been planned, or at least calculated. Analysts pointed to Drake's long history of aligning with artists others had overlooked, giving them momentum, absorbing their shine, and often walking away with a bigger platform. But this was different. This wasn't about boosting a friend. It was about challenging a legend. And with that came consequences. Fan accounts on Twitter began digging up old interviews, trying to map the relationship between Drake and Nas, tracing back every quote, every compliment, every moment of distance. One clip from 2012 surfaced where Drake called Nas a god full of admiration. But now the tone was different. Colder, tactical. It sparked new speculation. Had something gone wrong between them behind closed doors? Was this personal, or was Drake simply stepping into the role of kingmaker, deciding who belongs in the new pantheon? Jim Jones, of course, leaned into the attention. He appeared in a live stream just days later, laughing with supporters, brushing off haters like lint from his shoulder. "They mad 'cause I got co-signed by the biggest rapper in the world," he said, grinning. "And your favorite rapper's favorite rapper ain't saying nothin'." The crowd went wild in the comments. Fire emojis, goat emojis. And still Nas said nothing. Back in the media world, headlines started shifting tone. From Drake defends Jim Jones to Nas ghosts the industry while rap civil war brews. Some saw it as maturity, others as surrender. But the more silent Nas stayed, the louder everyone else got. Fans waited. Podcasts speculated. Commentators filled the void with theories about legacy, influence, and whether Drake was now the unofficial gatekeeper of relevance. What no one could deny was that this wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror, a reflection of how quickly the game could flip. And how one man's silence might just be the most powerful response of all. The split inside the fanbase wasn't clean, it was jagged, personal, and bitter. It cut across generations, tastes, and values. On one side were the new school believers, the ones who grew up with playlists instead of mixtapes, who counted streams instead of metaphors, and who saw Drake's words not as betrayal, but as evolution. To them, co-signing Jim Jones wasn't controversial, it was overdue. Jones had survived the eras, dropped hits, built his brand, and stayed visible in a game that forgets faces in months. But to the other side, the ones who carried Nas's lyrics like scripture, who still debated ether in barbershops, who remembered where they were the first time Illmatic dropped, this wasn't evolution. It was blasphemy. Felt like watching a cathedral be bulldozed to make room for a nightclub. The pain wasn't about Jim Jones winning. It was about Nas being forgotten, ignored, questioned by someone they thought respected the craft. YouTube exploded with reactions that mirrored the divide. Channels with younger hosts clapped back at the nostalgia crowd. "Y'all mad because the culture's not stuck in '94? One host said, leaning into the lens. "Get over it." Another influencer drew a line in the sand, saying Drake was simply being honest, acknowledging that consistency, visibility, and hustle should count for something too. "Jim been outside," he said. "Nas drops once a year and disappears. You tell me who's really relevant." The comment section turned into war zones. Threads ran thousands of comments deep, full of anger, jokes, and long, heartfelt defenses of both sides. But no matter which side fans stood on, one question kept resurfacing. What happens now? In the streaming era, relevance isn't permanent, it's rented. And legacy, once thought untouchable, is now something that can be voted on, reshaped, or even canceled. Nas's silence, once seen as power, now began to raise fear. Was this strategic restraint or quiet resignation? Behind the scenes, music journalists whispered that Nas's team had been fielding interview requests all weekend, declining all of them. No statement, no social post, no cryptic lyrics. Nothing. It left a void so deep that some fans began writing imagined responses for him, tweets he never posted, diss tracks he never dropped. The culture didn't want a reply. It needed one. Not because they wanted more beef, but because they needed assurance that the old gods were still awake. That the game hadn't moved on completely, but the industry waits for no one. And if Nas was watching from the sidelines, there was something else he had to say. Drake wasn't losing any love. In fact, his support for Jim Jones seemed to win. Him new fans. Fans who respected the audacity, the disruption, the refusal to bow to tradition. It wasn't about who was technically better, it was about who had the courage to challenge the sacred. And in that moment, Drake was winning. Jim Jones was rising and Nas was missing. The silence had stopped being poetic. It had started feeling like absence. And in a culture built on noise, absence can be the loudest thing of all. Some moments in hip-hop history play out on wax. Others unfold in silence, across quiet backroom conversations, carefully timed posts, and cosigns that echo louder than diss tracks ever could. Moment though one sparked by Drake's casual declaration that Jim Jones is better than Nas was. No longer just a public debate, it had evolved into something colder, more calculated. A power play. Because while fans argued over bars, cadences, and album classics, those watching from inside the industry saw something else. A shift in who gets to define greatness. More importantly, who gets to erase it. To understand the depth of this move, you had to step back from the headlines and look at the chessboard. Drake wasn't just defending a friend. He was positioning himself as the new curator of relevance. For more than a decade, he had been the bridge between generations. Collaborating with legends like Lil Wayne, kissing the ring of Jay-Z, even paying homage to Nas in the past. But with that single comment, he stepped out of the middle and drew a line. One side held the golden era, lyrical prestige, the kind of storytelling that shaped the foundations of the genre. The other side, movement, visibility, influence. And in that moment, Drake chose to stand beside momentum over myth, industry insiders. Notice some called it strategy. Others saw it as rebellion. There were whispers in A&R circles that Drake had grown tired of being seen as the student of the old gods. That maybe he was ready to shape the culture in his own image, no not as a student but as an architect. And choosing Jim Jones wasn't random. It was surgical. Jones represented a different kind of success. The street soldier turned mogul, the underdog who refused to fade. He was gritty, loud, and undeniably present. Drake's cosign didn't just elevate him, it redefined him. For younger audiences, unfamiliar with Nas's catalog, it offered a new hierarchy. One based not on history, but on headlines. Behind the scenes, platforms took notice. Streaming playlists adjusted. Jim Jones's interview clips began trending. Editorials shifted focus. Every action Drake took became a ripple, one that rewrote attention in real time. Meanwhile, Nas, the man once seen as untouchable, remained silent as algorithms slowly buried him. Some called it dignity. Others feared it was disengagement. In a digital world, silence isn't always mysterious. Sometimes it's just forgotten. But there's always a cost to reshaping legacy. Relevance won quickly is rarely held quietly. And those who challenge monuments often become targets themselves. Even Drake, with all his influence, had to know the backlash would come. That lines would be drawn. That some doors, once closed, gently, would now be slammed. Yet still, he moved. And that's what made this moment different. Not just for Drake, not just for Jim, but for every artist who's ever been told. They couldn't rewrite the story because the ink had already dried. This was no longer just about music. It was about authorship. And Drake, in one move, had claimed. The pen.nas had always moved differently. He was never the loudest in the room, never the one to chase clout or clap back in the digital noise of trending topics. His art spoke for him. His pen carried his presence. But now, in a world where silence is interpreted as weakness, mystery as absence, and patience as irrelevance, his refusal to respond had started to feel less like strength and more like disappearance. The pressure around him wasn't just coming from fans anymore. It was coming from the culture itself. Journalists waited, promoters hesitated. Even longtime collaborators were quiet, their support unspoken, their timelines untouched. In private circles, the question was the same. Will he say something? Not because the culture demanded a diss, but because it needed a pulse. And yet, Nas remained still. No interview. No subliminal bar. No vague tweet that could be interpreted 100 ways. The silence grew so loud that even his most loyal defenders began to waver, not in their respect for him, but in their fear that his legacy was being shaped without him. One viral tweet said it plainly. Legends don't fade because they fall off, okay? They fade because they stop fighting for their place, okay? And beneath it, thousands of likes and replies split between heartbreak and blame. The weight on Nas's shoulders wasn't just about defending his name. It was about defending a style of hip-hop that was slipping further out of reach. It's kind that prized storytelling over streams, poetry over platform. If he responded, he risked sounding bitter. If he stayed silent, he risked being erased. And that, more than any insult, was the real threat. Because in the digital age, legacy is fragile. It doesn't live in books or plaques or whispered reverence. It lives on timelines, on playlists, in the collective consciousness of an audience. That scrolls faster than it remembers. Nas knew this. It wasn't naive. But the question looming over him wasn't just if he would respond, was how would he drop a quiet, surgical track that didn't name names but pierced the moment with precision. Would he sit down with a trusted interviewer and speak with the weight of someone who's seen decades pass? Or would he do what no one expects and collaborate? Reframe the conversation entirely. No one knew. And that uncertainty was maddening. Every day that passed without a move became part of the narrative. And every post, every clip of Drake and Jim Jones laughing added another layer to the silence. But there was something else, something no one could quite put into words. A sense that maybe Nas wasn't gone. Maybe he was watching, calculating. Maybe he was waiting for the moment when his response wouldn't just be a reaction, but a reckoning. Because Nas never chased moments. He created them. And if he was planning to speak, it wouldn't be to match the noise. Would be to end it.